Thank you very much. And can I just say it's a really great honour to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. So my name's Rosie Kay. I'm a dancer and choreographer. I make very highly physical works. Athletic could be described as dance theatre with a political edge, which is what I'm sort of going to reflect on a little bit today. But I also make abstract dance that explores dance, music, and the emotional impact on audience. And I've worked with teams of multidisciplinary neuroscientists looking at how music and dance affects the brain. In 2013, I was the Leverhulme Artist in Residence to the School of Anthropology, and so I have a good training in anthropology and ethnography, and that led me to working with women with eating disorders, using dance to illuminate what we used to call a lived experience. And my work was touring the world until COVID, and consistently getting 4 or 5 star reviews. Now, I'm not just blowing smoke up my arse. There will come to a point to this. I think what's also interesting is that I was starting to get into some of the really big works, like the Commonwealth Games and the Olympics. And I know from first hand what pressures are put on artists to reflect a certain agenda, which I'm happy to talk to you about afterwards. And I suppose just most recently I was exploring military intelligence and surveillance technology and how that kind of intersects with the body. And I had a series of talks entitled The Mind as the Front Line. So today I'm going to talk about my work, my research, and some of the insights I've gained around transhumanism and the military, and this thing they're calling the augmented human soldier. But I've got a cancellation story first. So back in the summer of 2021, I was making a production of Romeo and Juliet on the big scale. It's my biggest work ever, and at one point it also had a 48-piece orchestra playing Berlioz's Romeo and Juliet score live. It was odd. I'd auditioned young dancers because of it being Romeo and Juliet, and they came to me in a funny state. We had to audition all with masks and social distancing. Can you imagine trying to do a love duet when you've got social distancing? They weren't connecting. We couldn't eat lunch together. It just wasn't like normal. And many of them were that young that they hadn't even been able to do their graduation performances because of that 2-year problem. So I tried to be caring and nurturing, and I invited them to the house, my house, that I share with my husband and, at the time, my 6-year-old son. I made gluten-free lentils. We had vegetarian, vegan options. We had everything. And by about midnight, they were starting to really demolish my rather nice wine collection. They asked me what my next show was, and I was really excited. I'd been spending about 2 years preparing an adaptation of Virginia Woolf's novel, Orlando. Now, if you know Orlando is a fantastic novel, and it's a virtuosic sort of exploration of style where Virginia Woolf changes the way she writes right through 600 years of British history, well, English history actually. But halfway through the novel, Orlando, who's a bit of a wet poet boy, transforms into a woman. And there's not much really said about it, except her life does completely change because she can no longer inherit the huge castle. So I was already getting into some complications with my management. I was told to use the phrase gender euphoria in the audition notice. And I said, no, we're not doing that. I don't know who it is. They just have to be fabulous. They have to be amazing dancers that convince me that they can be both male and female. I mean, I knew what I was doing, but I was fighting back. When the dancers started quizzing me, they said that has to be played by a trans person. I said, well, that's a bit confusing. You know, if they're male and then they change to female and they're female, wouldn't that actually be triggering for them? It got into a really, really heated argument around my beliefs on gender and gender and sex. I got to one point crying, telling them about how I and my baby both nearly died in childbirth, and that was a uniquely female experience. I got so exasperated that I said, honestly, if you just look down, you might know what genitals you have. And that was the thing that got me cancelled. The dancers made complaints. My management then paid them to make more complaints. My board, at first I thought were ignorant, but actually I think were, what's the word? They were conspiring. Also, I was guilty before any investigation started. I went through one investigation and I was exonerated. I thought things were going to get back on track. One of the dancers that had walked out, a non-binary dancer, appealed, and it started to get very legal and very scary, as Peter Daly would remember. In the end, I was so ill, I was so exhausted, I was so hurt and betrayed. I resigned, and I went very, very public. So my life changed completely and utterly. I lost my company. I lost my name for a year and a half. I had to fight insolvency lawyers for a year and a half, and I finally bought back my assets. So I'm here, I'm still dancing, I'm still choreographing. And I also have a company called Freedom in the Arts. So we support artists who are going through these cancellations, of which I've just seen one of the artists we're supporting here today. So transhumanism, let's get to the meat on the bones here. Let's just start saying that transhumanism and a lot of this movement is designed to deliberately disassociate humans, particularly young human children and vulnerable young people, from their bodies. Everything is about creating an alienation for your physical self and a disconnect. Now that split between mind and body, you know, that's been going on for quite a while, hasn't it? The Cartesian sort of split between mind and body. I thought it was quite interesting just thinking about like how we've thought about mind and body. And during the Industrial Revolution, philosophers, scientists compared the body to things like steam engines, pistons, and fuel. More recently, when I was working at the University of Oxford exploring eating disorders, I sat down with the clinical head of psychiatry at an eating disorder unit who described in great detail to me how anorexics' brains are failed computer loops. I kid you not. She was using the computer analogy to describe women who, funnily enough, were completely alienated from their bodies, disconnected from their sex, disconnected from their sexual feelings, their sexual needs, and the imposition of others' sexual desire on those bodies. So that was just over 10 years ago. And doing that work, I'd started to see this transhumanism stuff creeping through. I'm going to talk a lot about Five Soldiers, but Five Soldiers was part of a trilogy of works. They were to look at the war, the body in war, which became Five Soldiers, the body in religion, which became There Is Hope, and the body in politics, which became MK Ultra. So There Is Hope was about looking at how we need the body to evoke very strong experiences, transcendence, as was mentioned in the last talks. Also, I was looking at how cults are formed and what meaning are people missing from their lives, and can meaning be created from inside ourselves? And do we need religion to help us with that? MK Ultra started off being about 1984, but then I started to go down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. I kind of got obsessed with Jimmy Savile and the fact that Jimmy Savile wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was a cover-up. I interviewed a whole load of young people, teenagers and students, and one of the most striking things they said, and I'm talking about maybe around 2012, 2013, was they said, politicians have let us down. We just don't know what or who to believe anymore. Now, I got into pop stars, brainwashing, CIA-funded brainwashing, but actually what I was really interested in was the fact that we were creating a vacuum where very bad ideas could come in, and young people were being fed a diet of occult symbolism through things like music video and fashion, and transhumanism was right in there with it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Five Soldiers to explain where I'm getting with the augmented soldier. So, following a dream after an injury, I had an operation on my left knee, my first arthroscopy, and I think the anaesthetic affected me quite badly. when I woke up, I had this absolute vision and dream still in my mind that I was lying on a desert battlefield and my left leg had been blown off and it was over there and I was over here, I could see it. And I thought, first of all, oh shit. But then I thought, in my dream, well, would I still want to dance? Would I, Rosie, still want to dance? You could take off my legs, my arms, I'd still want to dance. What is that relationship between the body and the soul? Now that went downstairs, switched on the telly, and it was the faces of young men that had been killed in Iraq at that time. And I looked at those young men and I thought to myself, how on earth do you train and prepare the body for war? Maybe it's not like the movies, maybe they're like dancers. Maybe they love what they do and they keep that secret. So that set me off on a long journey. It took me a year, but I got embedded to an all-male infantry battalion. In fact, I didn't think it was all-male. I thought it was 10% female. Infantry was still all-male. So I sort of discovered, like, after 24 hours on the base, I found myself on Dartmoor with a 70-pound rucksack, body armour, helmet, running behind somebody, not knowing if they were shooting live or blanks. Actually, they did do a live firing exercise, going, what the hell? And the only woman there, I'm not just sort of a choreographer, I'm literally symbolising all of womankind to keep up with a battalion of 400 soldiers that had just got back from Iraq. Over those couple of weeks that I was with them, I went from being absolutely terrified bystander to fully trained participant, dancers training. Stand in the right place, in the right uniform, and do what you're told. Kind of helped. So by the end, I had my own rifle, and I was fighting as an insurgent against a rival battalion, the Black Watch, who are big, scary guys, and I got commended for my bravery. No, I had a nervous breakdown afterwards. I was really, like, broken by the fact that I wasn't the pacifist I thought I was. I was actually a bloody brilliant little warrior. So following 4 Rifles, I went to Headley Court, which is the Royal Centre for Defence Rehabilitation. This was much more my world. I'd worked a lot in disability arts, and that whole thing of putting people back into their bodies, the rehabilitation, this felt much more comfortable to me. And then I managed, through another under-the-radar thing, I managed to get into the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine, which is in Birmingham, the town I live in. Now, Birmingham is where they would be medevaced back from particularly Afghanistan by the time I was there. And the Taliban had changed tactics. They'd gone from firefights to planting IEDs, improvised explosive devices, in the ground. And now 1 in 4 patrols was ending in either death or life-changing injuries, as in losing single, multiple limbs, a lot of damage to groins and all the rest of it. By the time I was at Selly Oak, it was the people I'd trained with on Dartmoor that were coming back with those injuries. So it stopped being research and it started being real people. Now, a very good friend of mine, he lost both legs in Afghanistan. I think he was only on his first week out there. He also had his spine shattered in several places. And I went in to visit him. And I looked at him and I knew not to flinch. And I just said, bad day at the office, mate. And he laughed, and it was fine, and it cemented a friendship. I've watched him as he has gone through the most unbelievable sort of transformation with prosthetic limbs. He's now an artist and a writer, and he's doing really well. The interesting thing about all of this prosthetics, I'm getting there, was that the prosthetics have been the domain of the elderly ill, and it was often due to diabetes that people were losing lower limbs. In the army, we were having 19 and 20-year-olds coming back with multiple amputations who wanted to still be able to drive their Porsches. I kid you not, there is a quadriplegic who has a Porsche. They wanted to get back into sports. Some of them have climbed Everest. Some of them have walked across the North Pole. They needed really, really high-functioning prosthetics. So I'm going to jump forward to when just before I got cancelled, and I did the series of talks called The Mind is the Front Line. And I was talking with leadership in the army, soldiers, injured soldiers, intelligence people, people that worked in surveillance and data mining. And it was through researching those talks that I discovered a 2021 paper called The Augmented Soldier. And this goes to places where transhumanism is going, but as a civilian population, we're not really given that information yet. I'm just going to mention Martin Rothblatt, because you know, and I would really give credit to American artist and now journalist Jennifer Billick, who's been documenting this stuff on her blog, The 11th Hour, and I'd really recommend looking at that. He's a male, multi-billionaire, trans-identified person who wrote a book called From Transgender to Transhuman, a manifesto on the freedom of form. But the original title was The Apartheid of Sex. And that's very much the language that Rothblatt uses. The apartheid of sex is every bit as harmful, painful, and oppressive as the apartheid of race. And he said, in similar fashion, I now see that it's also too constraining for there to be two legal forms, human and non-human. There can be limitless variations of form, from fully fleshed to purely software, with bodies and minds being made up of all degrees of electronic circuitry between. To be transhuman, one has to be willing to accept that they have a unique personal identity beyond flesh or software, and that this unique personal identity cannot be happily expressed as either human or not. It requires a unique transhuman expression. Is this sci-fi? No. So, back to the augmented soldier. Human Augmentation, the Dawn of a New Paradigm, published in May 2021. It's available online. It's a code paper between the MOD, Development Concepts and Doctrine Center, and German Bundeswehr Office for Defense Planning. So they separate out the different ways that soldiers' bodies will be augmented, changed, amended, added, and taken away. They talk about using technology to radically enhance human performance. They see that human augmentation has the potential to transform society, security, and defense over the next 30 years. In it, they write, the military must understand the implications of these changes and shape them to our advantage now, before they are thrust upon us. Human augmentation has the potential to impact every facet of our lives and even change the meaning of what it means to be human. It could challenge philosophical concepts, our belief systems, and ethical and legal frameworks in ways that we have not anticipated. Now, the paradox of war is that humans are central to its conduct, but also its weakest link. Humans in the industrial age have been the operators of the machines, the vehicles, the ships, the aircraft. The machines deliver the war and the humans operate them. So these were people-operated platforms of war. The MOD is imagining that in the future we can integrate humans and machines to become what they call human warfare platforms. Now, what are they talking about? Let me just go through the different strands they go through in this paper. The first is exoskeleton. So that's where you kind of think of like RoboCops. Now, it was getting really difficult. The guys were carrying such heavy backpacks, very heavy body armor, heavy helmets, big, massive comm systems that can't be hacked. And it was starting to get beyond their abilities. There's a lot of hip injuries, there's lower back injuries, there's lots and lots of ankle and calf injuries. These exoskeletons are machines worn outside the body to improve human performance. However, also know my work with prosthetics, there are also now mind-machine connections. I know somebody who has a prosthetic arm that is controlled by their own mind. So they have this kind of superpower that they could, kind of withstand bullets, fire, or whatever. But you have limitations to that. At present, there's only 4 hours of battery power. It's quite interesting if it all just sort of stopped. The second part they're looking at is internal brain interfaces. So there are already several companies, as well as military and research money development organizations, aiming to develop a high bandwidth data connection between brain and computer. So we're not just talking about prosthetics, we're talking about linking up to intelligence. So you could have an officer on the front line who actually is sending information back to the intelligence base, say at like Camp Bastion or something, without actually having to write or kind of send anything. It could be going through their brains. That's a bit technical. And then another area of augmentation is sensory augmentation, which aims to extend the sensory range or acuity either by using gadgets or wearables to translate external information that we, with our human senses, might not be able to pick up. So they are talking about being able to have soldiers that can see in the dark, or that can feel vibrations of sort of low transport moves that we would never normally be able to feel through our unaugmented bodies. Gosh, I'll just read this out. More invasive options to enhance existing senses have also been demonstrated. For example, coating retinal cells with nanoparticles to enable vision in the infrared spectrum. Wow, huh? There are pharmaceutical interventions, of which I think we've all known about, particularly from the Vietnam War. But they are experimenting currently with different hormones, with creatine, with anabolic steroids. American Army had issues with that in Afghanistan. There's also, I can't pronounce this, but something called EPO, or hormone produced illegally to enhance sports performance. They're playing with adrenaline and testosterone. And they're even like reading up all about how psychedelic drugs like LSD and MDMA have seen a renaissance in therapy in recent years. One of the most sort of shocking areas I read about was also genetic modification. So they're talking about using CRISPR, clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what that is, but it's something to do with cutting up your DNA and splicing it back together again. Now, this is a quote from America. Based on what we know today, genetic modification has, by far, the greatest potential for human enhancement. According to the United States Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that's DARPA, genetic modification could be used to create super soldiers who kill without mercy, do not get tired, do not show fear, and behave more like a machine than a human. Don't worry, MOD are looking at ethics. So they admit the ethical and the moral implications are profound. Does human augmentation go against nature? Does it undermine people's dignity by robbing them of an ability to live a natural, authentic life? Will the value and meaning of our lives lessen if we no longer have to overcome hardship? Or, they ask, optimistically, will we reach new heights of intellectual and creative enlightenment? They think that the imperative to use human augmentation may ultimately not be directed or dictated by any explicit ethical arguments, but by national interest. There are other countries out there already doing this, and they actually say that one of the problems we have is in Western liberal democracies, that public opinion may halt the progress of this. So that's why I'm telling you, this is important that we know this, because they're aware that if the public understand all of this, we will ask them more questions. They say instead it's likely to be decided by governments based on national interests in terms of prosperity, safety, and security. So, in human rights terms, humans have legal rights, but machines do not. What do we do with a soldier that has been augmented? So, human rights. Augmented humans will make it increasingly difficult to adopt this binary approach of machines and humans because they'll be integrated. The ownership of augmented technologies and the data they use and collect will need to be carefully considered if implants become integral to people's bodies. There's an inconsistency and ambiguity that creates potential for individual privacy to be breached through what could become known as under-skin surveillance methods. There's a really big question about demobilization. How will we prepare soldiers for life after the military as if it wasn't hard enough anyway? For example, the use of human invasive augmentation may require surgery to remove or downgrade implants that may not be permitted in civilian life. That could cause enormous depression or trigger bigger mental health challenges. Or they say, again optimistically, these people might be very sought after by employers. So, in conclusion, I think the arts and transhumanism really are intrinsically linked. And to go back to sort of the rest of the conference that I've been thinking about, there's something so unbelievable about puberty blockers and our effect on brain development. And it's still very under-researched. But a lot of this this transgenderism takes away the very essence of being human, that vital spark, whether you call it the divine, the creative. It's a place where we find true pleasure. Pleasure in our bodies, pleasure in ourselves, pleasure connecting to others, pure joy, connecting to the planet, to the universe. It actually takes away that ability in humans. It robs us, it thwarts us of appreciating fully the human experience, unable to orgasm, but also unable to appreciate fine art. This is creating deliberately thwarted humans who will be easier to become slaves. So, more than a conspiracy theory, this is a wholesale attack on the very essence of being human. Thank you. I've got 2 questions.
Oh boy. So it's Mark. I'm a parent here. I think you talked about the divine. You talked or hinted at religion in some of what you said. And have you looked into the early 1st century Gnosticism? And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really very interested in the esoteric. I've looked at the occult. I've looked at Gnosticism. I think I practice in transcendental meditation, and I have done since I became ill as a teenager. And for me, I suppose I see art as very separate to religion, but there is a little bit of an overlap there. I think it was actually, I suppose, so much of my work is trying to combine so many things: the mind, the body, the spirit, the soul. But actually, even just sort of preparing for this talk, I really started to wonder about this Gnostic sense of like we're trapped in this physical material reality, and it really is making me think more and more like, what is our purpose in life? I suppose also being cancelled makes you have an experience where you have a purpose in your life, and even if it causes you suffering and pain, you might have to kind of really go through that and fulfill that. So there's things that we keep touching on in these past couple of days that it's like I know it's somewhere, but I can't really articulate it always. But I can sometimes through dancing.
Hi, I'm Jack. I made a joke on the first day, and then Rosie told me last night that you thought I might be serious. So I said I'm cisgender, but that was just a joke. But anyway, I used to be in the musical theatre industry, and I speak to some performers in that now who are kind of dying silently because it's turned so woke, not just on trans, but lots of stuff. So I'm just wondering, do you see any signs of perhaps they're developing a fringe, alternative theatre industry? I mean, with the media, we see places like the Daily Wire kind of branching off, and yes, a lot of them are very right-wing, for want of a better term. But I guess, yeah, I hope that things improve in that industry, because it's sad to see it be so captured.
Yeah, it is, but it speaks to something wider and deeper, which was also making me think about like helping young people that may feel trans-identified, and that's about the loss of really, really serious art in schools, really serious arts, because everything is becoming performative. If you're already acting, how can you then really understand acting? It's really odd, and I mean the arts have become so instrumentalized that it's all about well-being or this, that, and the other, but actually having a discipline and integrity, whether it be through music, through dance, through art, through singing, learning stuff that is very difficult, even as a young person, I think that helps integrate into your body and helps you understand that you can play different roles and be different people. So I have grave worries about the arts world, I do, and it's not getting better yet. Thank you.